Maria. On the down low. On the down low. Snail. Never seen that one. All right, normally when I ask somebody to pray for us, I always try to ask first, like, because some people are really shy about praying in public, but I don't think I have to this time. Cruz, would you open us up in a word of prayer? You go, boy.
What?
You're going to open us up in a word of prayer.
Oh, is that how this is?
That's how we're going to roll.
Okay. Thank you, Jesus, for giving us gain or become speakers.
Amen. Well played. Okay, you guys know the review. I haven't changed it too much. Jesus is greater or better than who or what?
Angels, Moses, prophets.
Prophets, priests. Yeah, good actually. Old covenant was totally insufficient. Why? People what? You can't go home and tell your parents that that's what you learned at Bible school, that people suck. But yeah. Okay, how can we enter into the Holy Holies without getting fried like Uzzah? Covered in the blood is right. What's another name for Hebrews chapter 11? The Hall of Faith, right? Faith is what we believe about who God says He is and He has promised. What were all those people commended for passing on? The promise. By the way, it doesn't mean like pass on, like I'll pass. It means like I passed on the promise. I received the promise, and I made sure everybody else knew about the promise, all right? This is kind of a loose question, but what do Gideon, Barak, Samson, David, and Jephthah all have in common?
They were just briefly mentioned.
They were far, far from perfect people, and yet they made it into the Hall of Faith. Why should that encourage us? Because if God could use the likes of them, maybe He could use the likes of us, right? Highly imperfect, dysfunctional people, but also faithful that continue to follow God, and therefore God can do great things through. Good answer. What word starts with a P does Pastor Dane think is the most important thing from last week's lesson? Perseverance is right, yeah. Yeah, Pastor. And the reason why, I think that's part of my review for today right now, is quite frankly, it's great to see all you young, fresh, scrubbed faces all excited about Jesus. And I get really excited because you guys are excited about Jesus. But at the same time, you really want to make me happy and proud of you, man, follow Jesus till your dying day. Because, man, it takes a lot more gumption to, like, play the long game and finish all the way to the end of your life than it does to be excited for a short period. Amen? Okay? The older I get, the more excited I get about old people that are just walking with God. Okay, and then lastly, sometimes we face discipline because of our own sin, but sometimes because, it's a good question, isn't it, yeah? I don't like to swear in front of you guys. You ever seen the bumper sticker, crap happens? Yeah, just remember that. In fact, that'll be the correct answer to that question. Crap happens. What I mean by that is sometimes we get disciplined by God because we screw up. And just like, if you screwed up, your father might, spank you, put you in a timeout, ground you, depending on how old you were and what was appropriate, right? So sometimes we get disciplined by God, quite frankly, because we screw up. And God allows us to suffer the consequences of our sin. What are the consequences of sin? The wages of sin is? Death, bingo. And so that's the consequences of sin. Whether it's physical death, not likely, but more like death to a relationship, death to joy, death to peace, right? But sometimes we're just going along, like maybe serving God, maybe doing really good. Maybe it's not because of a specific sin, but we live in a fallen world. And what that means is everything in this world is broken, is likely to break on you and let you down, including and especially other people and their sin. Does that make sense, right? So sometimes you suffer because of your own sin, sometimes you suffer because of other people's sin, and sometimes just crap goes wrong. Crap happens. So the answer, the correct theological answer to that question is, sometimes we face discipline because of our own sin, but sometimes because crap happens. Right, you're just minding your own business. But even when crap happens, God is using it for your good, like we studied in Hebrews last week. Okay, well done. So let's all turn to Hebrews chapter 12. We are in verse 14. Make every effort to live in peace with all men and be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. Well, it seems like two different ideas there. Make every effort to live in peace. So, peace, man. Okay, for bonus questions, this short paragraph begins with our author urging his listeners to pursue peace and holiness. Now, it's interesting because earlier in this very chapter, we have been told that both peace and holiness are actually gifts from God. So how is it he can say, make every effort to live in peace and holiness when those are gifts from God? You don't need to answer that question. I'll just tell you. It's kind of the same thing about how God both gives us salvation, but look what he says about the salvation that is a gift. This is from Philippians. Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Now, isn't salvation a gift? But doesn't it sound like he's saying, like, earn your salvation? It sounds like it, but that's not what he's saying. He doesn't say, now I want you to earn your salvation, or now I want you to work for your salvation. He says, I want you to work out your salvation. What that means is God has planted salvation within you. Now I want to see the outflow of that salvation, which is your changed life and how you love other people, share the gospel, serve Jesus, get to know him, all those wonderful things. That's what it means to work out your salvation. The way one commentator put it, I love it. What this verse means is work out what God has already worked into you. Have you ever done that thing where you like, what is it, like when you make bread or, you know, and you're like mixing it all up together? Because you start with flour and then you add what? Water, yeast, maybe salt. Is it salt? Yeah. And then what do? You knead it. You work it all. You work it in. So picture this for, here's a good visual. God works salvation into you, right? And then your job is to work it out. Like, work it out so you get to go feed people that bread. That's, okay, let's stop the illustration at that point. But it's to work out what God has already worked into you. So he's same thing with peace and holiness. God has given us peace. God has given us holiness. And now he's saying, make an every effort to live that out with the people around you. Okay? We have been given, this is a nice word, a modicum, which means a small amount, of faith and gifts, and now we are to go out and exercise the office. Oh, I didn't put this in here, but if you're taking notes, call this Dane's Common Courtesy Rant. And maybe you've heard this rant before, but I want to go off on this about, just for a minute, I'm going to go off on a little bit on just the strength, beauty, and awesomeness and Christian behavior of common courtesy. What is common courtesy? Anybody want to give me an example of common courtesy? Yeah, open the door for someone. Who said that? Ezra. Well said. How about just saying please and thank you? Okay, here's my rant. Those are such small things, but quite frankly, I believe common courtesy is sort of the lubricant that allows people, groups of people, and even nations to just get along. Because sometimes if you bump somebody, what would you say? Sorry, excuse me, sorry, right? The littlest thing can make the other person go, oh yeah, no worries, right? But if you just bump somebody and look at them like, what? Then what happens? Yeah, jerk, trouble. That's, you know what? You know how many people have been killed because of lack of common courtesy? I remember a friend of mine, There was a big bar fight one time down in South Africa where I lived, and I was the pastor of the local church, and the bar fight became a big deal because it was between a professional surfer and some local guy. And later on, I saw a friend at the beach, and I said, hey, I heard that guy got his butt kicked last night. Ha ha. And he goes, oh, yeah, I was right there. And I asked him, I go, well, what happened? He goes, well, the answer is alcohol. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, what happened maybe doesn't matter, because what is it? You know, I bumped your drink, you looked at my girlfriend, but alcohol caused it. But I like that point about bumping the drink in the bar. You know how many people have probably lost their lives because they spilled somebody's drink in a bar? I bet it's in the hundreds, if not thousands. And it probably all could have been solved by the guy going, oh, sorry, let me buy you another drink. Common courtesy. But instead, they end up in an emergency room and dead. Sorry, maybe I'm going on. This rant's going on a little bit too long. I'm going to continue on. I got another one for you. You want to hear Dane's personal pet peeve? Okay, I drive between here and my house, 4 or 5 times a day. And every day I drive past a couple crosswalks. There's the one right at Little Fish, right? There's another one at Keoki's, right? Right in front of Keoki's, yeah? And I'm like Johnny's super courteous driver. I just am, right? I pride myself on it. So when I see people approaching the crosswalk, I always slow down. And I always look to see, what am I looking for? Do the people turn and kind of give me a, right? Like, thanks. And they don't have to like, no, I'm not looking for that. Just a little bit of a acknowledgement. You stop. Here's the reason why. I find this interesting. Because I've lived in third world countries where they don't stop for pedestrians at all. Like, you risk your life. If you step out, has anybody been in a country like that? Yeah, you step into the street, man, you are on your own. Like in America, we have all these really gnarly laws, man. If you cut off somebody in a crosswalk, that's a heavy fine. If you hit somebody in a crosswalk, you're dead. You're going to jail. Like, pedestrians are like sacred here. And what drives me nuts is I think a lot of Americans think they're sacred because of these rules. And I've seen people, just the other day, I watched this girl, she just walked right out in the crosswalk. Never even looked to see if somebody was going to slow down, right? Let alone, like, give me a little bit of a, right? Nothing. That drives me nuts. So why am I going on a little bit of a rant? Because honestly, I think the little things build into big things, yeah? Little bits of, excuse me, oh, could you please do me? Hey, thank you for that. Or even just giving a nod when somebody waves you into the intersection, right? Because we do that around here a lot too. You know, you're stopped and you're like, go ahead. And some people just go, like, yeah. Around here, it's considered polite to do what? You know, shock him. Thanks, brah. Those little things are important. How do we live at peace, yeah, with all men and be holy, man? Be different. Holy means separate. Live out your holiness in even the little things, yeah? And by the way, that's why I put a picture of that guy up there, because I was raised in the 70s, and people would go around all that. People did this all the time. People go around and go, hey, peace, man, peace, yeah. And that meant like, yeah, we're all good, right? We're good, you're good, I'm good, we're good. Peace. You know, did you guys ever play that game when you're driving on the freeway and you see a trucker and you do this? Yeah, right, yeah? Yeah, and then they go, bah, bah, right? You know, when I was a kid, we'd like look for hippies. Isn't that funny? And we'd see like, every time we saw a Volkswagen van, we'd be like, for sure, Volkswagen vans are what hippies drive. And we'd like, look. And if we saw a dude with long hair, we'd be like, and then if they gave us the peace sign back, we'd be like, yeah, we won, right? So anyways, when I think of peace, I always think of hippies. By the way, for bonus points, who's that? Johnny Cash. That's a great attempt, and so not Johnny Cash, but so funny. Does anybody know who that is? Anybody? Jerry Garcia? Of what band? Stryper. That's the Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead. Oh, that's so funny. You guys don't know that. Bonus points. How many times did I see him in concert? 60. Well, I saw the Dead 58 times and the Jerry Garcia band twice. So I seen him technically 60 times and the Grateful Dead 58 times. No. Because like a zillion other people wanted to be in them. All right, let's move on. All right, verse 15. Read along. Find it in your Bible. Read with me. See to it that no one misses the grace of God and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. Now, this is interesting. My version says, see to it that no one misses. What does yours say, Maria, the ESV? Verse 15. What does it say? Oh, it also says see to it. Okay, I'm going to introduce you to a new word. See to it that nobody... Oh, that was kind of a funny meme. Don't you think that's a funny meme? The bishop and the queen. Did you anybody get the humor on that? Yeah. Now, why did I use that meme with a bishop? Well, because I want to teach you this word. This is really interesting. Episcopointes, right? Episcopointes technically means to watch over or to care for. And the NIV translates it see to it, but that's, I think, a lousy translation. To watch over is a better translation. Now, why did I put the bishop? Because that same word, episkopos, one who cares for, one who watches over, is used a lot in the scripture, and it's translated bishop. In other words, you have bishops and pastors. Pastor is more of a what? That's a good question, isn't it? Teacher. The word for pastor is like usually translated from the didacte or whatever, teacher. Didaskalos is the Greek word for teacher. But a bishop is like an elder or somebody who looks over. In other words, you care for the flock. Now, the reason why I always remember this interesting word is because I was raised in the church as an Episcopalian. Oh, isn't that interesting? Episcopalian. Where do they get that word from? Because Episcopal Church does not have a pope. They are run by bishops. See if you're putting all together. So quite frankly, what's going on here is the author of Hebrews is telling you all to be bishops, right? To look over and care for the people in your lives. Does that make sense? So, remember what Cain said to God when God said, was your brother Abel? He said, am I my brother's keeper? And what is the correct answer? Yes. We are to look out for and to look over everybody. So this is interesting because it's kind of the flip side of the last verse. The last verse was, hey, we should all strive to make peace. We should all strive to be holy. But in this situation, he's actually telling us quite literally, help others do that. In other words, don't let them miss the grace of God, right? Let me read you, from Deuteronomy 29:18. Make sure there is no man or woman, clan or tribe among you today. Remember, this is Moses giving the law for the second time to the Israelites, yeah? Make sure there's no man or woman whose heart turns away from Yahweh, our God, to go and worship the gods of these nations. And then look what he says here. Make sure there is no root among you that produces such bitter poison, right? Now, go back and read what the author of Hebrews wrote. See to it that no one misses the grace of God and that no bitter root grows up and causes trouble to defile the many. Remember, the person who wrote this really knows their Old Testament. They virtually took a rule out of Deuteronomy, but instead of making it a capital L law, he says, make sure they don't miss the grace, the gift of living out a life for Christ so they won't grow old and bitter. Has anybody in this room ever known somebody who maybe either used to be a Christian or maybe they're still a Christian, but they don't go to church anymore? And the reason why is because they are bitter. At who? The church, right? Oh, I know lots of those people. Why? Because I'm a pastor and I run into people fairly frequently that used to go to KCF or used to go to another church. And when I talk to them, they're like, I would never go back to that church. Do you know how they treated me at that church? I was stabbed in the back by the church. Yeah? Isn't that interesting? Yeah? Like they couldn't forgive the church. They didn't understand what it meant to live in grace, to not only receive grace from God, but to give grace to those amongst us who have offended us. If you go to church, are you likely to be offended? Yes. Oh, absolutely. Not just likely. You better be getting offended or you're in the wrong church. Because listen, if you go to a church where nobody offends you, that means you're probably the offensive one. Right? Because every good church has people that are going to step on your toes or annoy you or stab you in the back. If you think that's a bad thing, you're wrong. How would God use being offended in the church to help us? It would be a trial. It would be a discipline, something that we would grow through. And so what happens is if you bail a church at the first offense, you stop growing. Does that make sense? Yeah? By the way, bad news for all you single people. Is everybody in here single? Yeah? What is the number one person God will use in your life to offend you, sin against you, and cause you to grow in grace? Your spouse. Did I ever tell you about that wedding I did when I asked their permission first, but I was doing their wedding vows through the Lord's Prayer, and we got to the forgive us our trespasses. What's next? As we give them. And I said this, I said, here you stand before me, and they were hand in hand. And I said, you don't hear this at a lot of weddings, but let's talk about forgiveness in your marriage, because the fact of the matter is, the person that you are holding hands with right now will sin against you more than any other person on the planet. That's not normally the kind of thing you see here at a wedding, but they wanted me to say that. They asked me if I'd say that, yeah? Can I reiterate that? On your wedding day, standing there hand in hand, and it's all hearts and flowers and rainbows and unicorns and I'm getting married, right? But that's true. That person you're holding hands with is going to sin against you more than anybody else on the planet. Does that make sense? How are you going to learn to do that? How to live with that person? What does he say? Make every effort to live in peace with all men and see that no one misses the grace. God is going to teach you how to receive his grace and give grace to others in the relationships that you have. Okay? That was kind of a big chunk. Where were we? So am I my brother's keeper? Yeah, answer is yes. Okay, I think we finished all that. Let's move on and talk about Esau. You guys remember Esau from the Old Testament? Remember who he is? We didn't cover Esau, but you guys have studied him in Genesis. So quickly look at my stupid memes. What TV show is the top one from? Seinfeld, yeah. Soup Nazi. Yeah. Esau, give me some soup. Jacob, you want soup? Give me your birthright, right? And then Esau's all bitter about it after. So you remember this story? Esau was technically born first, but God told Abraham that the older will serve the younger, that there would be a switch. And then, of course, what happens? Esau shows up one day home from the hunt, and he's starving. And what does he say to Jacob? Give me some of that soup before I starve to death. And Jacob, because he's a scoundrelly, lying deceiver, that's actually what his name means, deceiver, weenie, he says, sure, I'll give you some soup, but give me your inheritance. Remember what was the most important thing to get passed down? The promise, the inheritance, right? It was supposed to go to the oldest child, which was the hairy man, Esau, because he's hairy, right? Yeah. But instead, the wimpy, smooth one, that's what they called him, smooth, because he had no whiskers. He was smooth, yeah. He cheats him. He says, sure, give me your inheritance and I'll give you soup. Now, what does Esau do? He says, okay, fine. He abandons the spiritual promise of wholeness and completeness for eternity for one quick satisfaction of the flesh, right? So Esau becomes a picture of putting the flesh over the spiritual. Are you with me? Now, with that in mind, let's read the verse. What did I say? 16 and 17. See that no one is sexually immoral or is godless like Esau, who for a single meal sold his inheritance rights as the oldest son. And afterwards, as you know, when he wanted to inherit this blessing, he was rejected. He could bring about no change of mind, and I love this, though he sought the blessing with tears. Remember when he cries to his dad? Surely there must be a blessing for me. Remember that? And And Abraham does, or Abraham, excuse me, is it Isaac? Yeah, Isaac does. Isaac does give him a blessing, but he sort of gets a secondary blessing. He misses out on the main blessing. Now, that's why these things, carnal, food, sex, drugs, shopping, surfing, I put all those in there. Are those things inherently bad on their own?
Some of them, yes.
Which one? No. Don't you ever take antibiotics?
Oh, yeah.
Trick question. I got you, Maria. Sorry, yeah. No. Look, none of those things are inherently bad. Because when I said drugs, you're immediately thinking, yeah, snorting cocaine or like Ezra smoking weed, right? Every single session, it's got to come up. At least once. Every session, right? I love this. All right, cool. Okay. No. None of those things are inherently bad. It is when they are used badly. Does that make sense, right? And when you use any of those things badly, whenever you put the flesh as higher than the spiritual, then you end up like Esau in tears. Now, how do you know when to do that? Well, pay attention to what God says up here. God says, don't do these things wrong. Even when it comes to like a basic thing like sex, I have given you parameters, right? Sex is a great thing, but use it within the parameters that I'm going to give you. If you go outside of those parameters, it can and likely will destroy your life, right? So that's a great example of keeping things in order. So the things of God first and the pleasures, not even just the pleasures, the things of this world, the flesh, the material things, secondly. Esau got it screwed up and it ruined his life, okay? Let me see. Okay, yeah. Think of the great promises God has for us and how foolish to look only at the temporal things. So Esau makes a bad choice. He's bummed. And in this context, it's not really a salvation issue. Does that make sense? It doesn't mean you're going to hell. Yeah. It's just that for all of us in this situation, if we apply ourselves to Hebrews 12, what it means is this: when we make ungodly choices, right, like Esau, we sort of diminish the role of God in our life, and we make choices based on what, my need for right now, right? Yeah. The consequences can be ugly, and I will even say this: there is no statute of limitations on those consequences, which means people like myself have made decisions back when they were young that they're still paying dues on today, that they still suffer from for today. Does that make sense? Yeah? Be very careful. I think I shared that illustration with you one time. My friend once said people think of sin as like when your parents tell you to be home by midnight on Saturday, and then they tell you, and if you're not home by midnight, you can't go out next week. I've told you that one before, right? So there you are at a party. It's 11:30. You're like, oh, I should go, because if I'm not home in 30 minutes, I can't go out next week. And then you're like, you know what? Screw it. I'm just not going to go out next week. So you party till 2, right? Then you get home and you think, okay, I won't go out next week. I've made that sacrifice. People think sin is like that. Oh, I know. I'll just sin, and yeah, maybe I'll feel guilty for a little while, but then I'll get over it, and then I'll be okay. And you have no idea. Sin is so deceitful. Remember we talked about this last week. The cords of sin ensnare a man. And if you think, oh yeah, I'll just suffer for a little while, think again. Sin's really scary. It kills everything it comes in contact with. It's death, and it can actually affect you for the rest of your life, like it did Esau. Oh, what do I care? One quick bowl of soup, and yeah, I'm sure I'll be fine even without the blessing, and then he ended up in tears. How's that? That sounds like such an old guy lecture. I don't mean to do that to you. I'm actually trying to speak to you logically here, yeah? Just be logical about putting God first in your life, and it will go much better for you. Okay, we really only have sort of one topic left. And I'm tempted to shine it, because it's kind of one complete topic, but it's probably longer than we've got. I really only have 15 minutes left. So I think I'm going to do something different. Let's just stop there. And you guys are like, no way. 30-minute course. I know. Look how bummed you are, Cameron. Cameron's over there going, yes, I love Uncle Dane. He's the best teacher ever. Did I ever share that story with you? Because don't worry, we're going to talk for at least a few more minutes. Did I ever share that story with you when I was preaching at Doncaster Methodist Church? Where is Doncaster? England, yeah. And it was the funkiest, weirdest, most awkward church ever. Did I tell you that they had their organist had died? And they were still doing the old hymns. Does anybody grow up in a church with a pipe organ? Have you ever been in a church with a pipe organ? Okay, I'm glad you have. It's really loud, and it always starts out like this. Dun, 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 right? And then it goes, oh, the Lamb of the Lord is the prayer, dun, 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 right? So at this church, are you with me? Okay, listen up. So are you guys going to pay attention, or because I said we're done, we're done? No. Okay, because I got just 2 quick stories, then we'll wrap up, I promise, unless you have questions. Because I got so much time, I got to say something else, right? So our first day at the church, we sit down. There's only about 25 people in this giant church that used to hold like 200, but it had died. It was this dying Methodist church. And right before they start, there's 2 ladies sitting at the pipe organ. And the guy next to us turns to us and he makes an excuse. He says, listen, I'm terribly sorry about this, but our organist has died. I'm like, okay. And he goes, and so we're teaching Thelma. I love that name. That was her actual name. And I'm like, okay. And he goes, Thelma's our janitor. I go, okay. And she's up there right now with her teacher. And I go, okay. And he goes, okay. So this is how it happens. At the right cue, they look at Thelma and they're like, okay. Dun, 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 dun. And we all start to sing, oh, the Lord. And the organ goes, stops. And everybody's like, oh, the Lamb of the. And we all stop. And then the teacher is talking to Thelma. It's okay. She looks at us. She's like, got her back to us, right? So she looks back at us. She's like, da, 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 da. Oh, the Lamb of the Lord is the thou, and then everybody just stopped. This is the church I'm talking about. It's the most awkward church. I got more stories. I got Doncaster Methodist. We were there for 10 days. It never got any better from that moment on. The whole time. Everything was so awkward and just bizarre. One time we finished this one team meeting. We get in the van and one of the girls goes, okay, I just got to say it. Does anybody else think this is the most awkward church ever? And the whole van went, yeah, what's wrong? These people. It was like a cartoon. Everybody was awkward. But anyways, I got to preach at Doncaster Methodist Church, right? Now, it's a very old conservative church. Their pastor wore the collar, the whole thing. Stained glass windows. Pipe organ that didn't work or whatever, yeah. So I get up and I preach my little heart out. But I realized they probably never had anybody quite like me because, I'm a little different than probably what they were used to. I'm preaching with an aloha shirt because I don't have a collar. And so my point is, when I was done preaching, I came down off the stage or the pulpit or whatever the thing was they called it, and people came walking forward to come talk to me. And I was like super curious. Like, what are these people going to think of this kind of California, Hawaii surf guy telling funny stories for a Sunday sermon? And the first lady comes up, and she's probably about 4'10". And she looks up and she goes, Pastor Dane, I just want to tell you how much I thoroughly enjoyed your sermon this morning. And I was like, well, thank you. And she goes, it was so short. And she walked away. I was like, well, thank you very much, I guess. My point is this. People might complain all about your teaching. People might complain about your sermonizing. People might complain about your Bible study that you teach. But one thing they will never say is it was too short. It will never say it's too short. So with that in mind, does anybody have any questions for Pastor Dane today? Limited to the topic at hand. No? Was this the best teaching ever? Because it was short? Yeah? Okay, then here's a little preview. Next week we will call this a Tale of Two Mountains. Dun, dun, dun. And that will be next Wednesday at 11 a.m. because the schedule already came out. So you guys, yeah, for next week. Yeah, for me it came out. Rick's still monkeying with it. So you guys have a great week. Have a great lunch. And I'll see you when I see you.